A Heavy Weight is intended for mature audiences. This series discusses topics that may be triggering to some listeners, such as suicide and drug use. Some names in this series have been changed to protect identities. Views expressed by guests on this series are their own and may not reflect my own. Resources and source materials can be found on our website, aheavyweight.com. Thank you so much for listening. If you haven't yet listened to Episode 1, stop now and start at the beginning. A Heavy Weight is the story of the unexplained disappearance of Joseph Smedley. It's Monday, September 28, 2015, and 20-year-old Indiana University student Joseph Smedley is missing. He left his shared house sometime after 10:30 p.m. Sunday night, and his sister Vivian received a strange text at 4:15 Monday morning.
I received this text message from him around 4 a.m. and it was saying Viv, I'm sorry, I have to leave the country. Don't attempt to contact me. I'll contact you once I'm set up overseas. And super strange because I just talked to him the night before.
At first, Vivian thought the text had to be a joke. But when she was unable to get in touch with her little brother, she became concerned. She asked the Indiana University Police Department to do a welfare check on her brother, but Joseph didn't show up for class. By Monday afternoon, IUPD officers called Vivian with some unexpected news.
At first, they said that they found him and he was in jail. I'm like, okay, this doesn't make any sense. And I was like, well, what is he in jail for? They said battery. Doesn't sound like him. So then I called my ex and I'm like, oh, I guess he's in jail. And then he's like, what? That doesn't sound like him either. So I called my mother-in-law at the time and I said, my brother's in jail. And she was like, what? No way.
Nobody close to Joseph could believe he'd been arrested for battery. Vivian's mother-in-law gave her a helpful piece of advice.
She's like, you need to call the police department and just call the jail and verify that he's actually there, because that doesn't sound like him. So I called the jail and I said, is there a Joseph Smedley there? They said no.
She called IUPD to tell them her brother wasn't in jail, but they assured her they'd checked and confirmed that Joseph was in jail.
So then at this point, I've got 3 or 4 different people calling the jail and asking, seeing if they can get a different answer. And the guy at the jail is getting really frustrated because he's like, there is no Joseph Smedley here. And so I'm like, what is going on?
Vivian asked IUPD officers to call once more and confirm whether or not her brother was in jail.
And at first they were like, we're not calling him. This is over. And I'm like, you need to call them because they're telling me that he's not there.
When IUPD officers called the local jail, they realized there had been a big mix-up. This was only the first of several police missteps and strange occurrences that happened during the first few days of the investigation into Joseph's disappearance. After acknowledging their mistake, IUPD had to make the difficult call to Vivian, letting her know her brother was still missing.
They're like, okay, yeah, you're right. Joseph's not there, so we're going to go ahead and file him as a missing person tonight.
By the morning of Tuesday, September 29th, over 24 hours after he was last seen, Joseph was officially declared a missing person, and an IUPD detective named Rebecca Schmiel was assigned to his case. Vivian was relieved her brother wasn't in jail, but she still didn't have any idea where he might be. Even though she still had hope that he was going to turn up or come home. Knowing that he was officially declared a missing person was hard to accept.
So then now I'm at work and I'm like, oh my gosh. So now they're like filing him as a missing person. I can't concentrate because I'm like, I didn't think that it was going to get to that level. I thought they were just going to find him.
Vivian couldn't stop thinking about that last text she'd received from her brother. From the start, she had a gut feeling that Joseph may not have sent her the text. Even more strange was the fact that Joseph didn't have a passport, making the idea of him leaving the country implausible.
Yeah. And yeah, it's just no way. And like Joseph's personality, first of all, if for some reason he was actually leaving the country, that's not the way that he would do it. Like he would have sent me some kind of code or sent me some like mysterious encrypted message. Like he wouldn't have me wondering, what's going on and all this stuff.
As far as Vivian knew, she was the only one who had received a message from Joseph's phone that Monday. She found this unusual because Joseph and his younger sister Giselle were also close, and he would have certainly notified her as well.
And on top of that, he was still communicating with my little sister. If he was going to say goodbye to me, he was going to definitely say goodbye to her as well because he loved her so much. And it just was so strange that I was the only one that received a text message and that was the contents. That's just not his personality.
By Tuesday morning, it had been about 36 hours since anyone had seen Joseph. The jail mix-up had taken precious time to sort out, and Vivian didn't want any more time wasted in the search for her brother, so she decided to take things into her own hands. First, she posted a photo of Joseph on her Facebook page and asked if anyone had seen her brother recently. Then she started her own investigation. She tracked down Joseph's friends, called them, left messages, and went through his social media to see what his last movements were.
I had no idea who to even reach out to start to say, like, hey, have you seen my brother? Because his entire friend group had changed over the course of like a semester and a half, and I didn't know these people. I literally had to just go on his Instagram and start with the last tagged photo of whoever it was and like work my way through his social media and reach out to them that way.
As Joseph became more involved with his fraternity, Sigma Pi, his entire group of friends changed in a short amount of time leading up to his disappearance.
Yeah, I mean, it's very attractive, and they have huge parties and all these events, and when he spends all that time trying to be a part of it, the second half of his freshman year, I think that he was probably just trying to get as involved as possible so he could enjoy, all of the fruits of his labor that he had to endure to get in there.
Vivian knew of Joseph's roommates, who we're referring to by the pseudonyms Josh and Ryan, but she hadn't yet met them. They were at the top of her list as she drove down to Bloomington Tuesday after her brother was officially declared a missing person. The Mitchell Street house that Josh, Ryan, and Joseph shared was Vivian's first stop.
The first thing I did was talk with the brothers, and they all said that they hung out at the house and watched TV and then went to bed around 11.
When Vivian spoke with Josh and Ryan, she was surprised that they didn't seem overly concerned about her brother's whereabouts.
And his roommates still at the time weren't they didn't seem like they thought he was missing.
Vivian told me that Josh and Ryan's initial reactions raised red flags for her, but she didn't spend a lot of time thinking about it because she was focused on digging up any information that would help her find her brother. Vivian had another reason for stopping by the Mitchell Street house. She wanted to have a look around her brother's room to see if she could find anything that would give her a clue about where her brother might have gone. And what she found left her even more worried. When Vivian checked around Joseph's room, the first thing she noticed was that a lot of his personal belongings were still there. Things you would take with you if you were leaving the country or going on a trip.
His phone charger and his toothbrush and all these different things that you would take with you if you're leaving or still at the house. Like, he didn't take anything with him.
But Vivian found something else that didn't add up. Sitting on top of the desk were the checks Joseph had picked up. The checks he'd needed to pay for his apartment balance that Monday.
Yeah, like I literally talked to him the night before.
Yeah.
And he was studying, from what I heard, and he was fine. I mean, he sounded normal. He didn't mention anything about leaving. He told me he was going to drop the check off the next day.
Based on the scene in her brother's room, it looked like he hadn't planned on being gone for long. After she left the Mitchell Street house, Vivian reached out to Rebecca Schmiel, the IUPD detective newly assigned to Joseph's case. She was hopeful they may have a new lead or new information to share.
I started getting in contact with Rebecca Schmiel, who was like the lead detective on the case. And she said that one of the first places they went was they checked all his classes and then they went to his roommates.
When Joseph didn't make it to any of his classes on Monday, Detective Schmiel first checked in at his house with his roommates to see if they'd seen or heard from Joseph since Sunday night. So far, Vivian and IUPD detectives had followed the same trail. There wasn't any new information the department had to share with Vivian. Detective Schmiel declined to be interviewed for this podcast, but according to Vivian, back in 2015, Josh and Ryan told Detective Schmiel about the same story they'd told her, that they watched a movie with Joseph until about 10:30 or 11 p.m. Sunday evening, and then all went to bed. The roommates said that it was usual to not see Joseph on Monday mornings because he had an early 6 a.m. class. None of this was news to Vivian, but then Detective Schmiel revealed something unsettling. When detectives first arrived to the Mitchell Street house on Monday, Josh and Ryan produced a handwritten note.
All of a sudden, when they came to their door, they produced like this handwritten note.
The note was eerily similar to the text message that Vivian received 4:15 a.m. on Monday morning. It appeared to be hastily written and read, "Had to leave country. Don't try to contact me via cell, it won't work. Will contact you once set up overseas." The note was signed Smedley and dated September 28th, the same Monday Vivian received her text. She told me she found the note odd for a few reasons.
If he wanted you to see it, why would he leave it on his own bed? And then, like, it was signed Smedley, which he never went by. Only the fraternity brothers called him that. And so it was just strange.
It was unclear to Vivian whether Joseph's roommates found the note right when detectives arrived at the Mitchell Street house or if they'd noticed it before then. Either way, Vivian could tell something was off.
They never reported it. They never raised an alarm for them. If that was the case, that he wrote that note, like, why wouldn't they immediately call the police or immediately, be more alarmed than they were? It's just like, oh, by the way, we found this note, If they're his brothers and they love him so much and all of this stuff, if you would have found the note, you would have been the one to call the police and say, hey, this is really concerning, or even reach out to a family member. You wouldn't just assume that, this handwritten note on his bed is a joke. And the fact that they didn't reach out to anyone, and it wasn't until the police came to their door that all of a sudden this note appears out of nowhere is just really strange.
Vivian didn't think the handwriting on the note belonged to Joseph. She never knew her brother to go by Smedley, and she couldn't figure out why he would have dated the note September 28th if he'd left the night of the 27th. To this day, the note is a critical piece of evidence in Joseph's case, so it's important we take time to understand its significance. Let's assume for a moment that Joseph did write the note. In my mind, the date raises two possibilities. 1. Maybe Joseph did go out late that Sunday night, to see the blood moon by himself. Maybe he stopped back by his house sometime early Monday morning, wrote the note, and then left it on his bed. Or 2, maybe he wrote it before leaving the house on Sunday, or possibly even early Monday morning when he allegedly sent that text to Vivian. It seems most logical that if Joseph is the author of the note, he would have left it in his room before leaving his house Sunday night. If that's the case, why would he have dated it for the next day, Monday? Why even date it at all? Vivian had a lot of those same questions, but back in 2015, the note wasn't what concerned her most. It was the text message that had come from Joseph's phone. After seeing the note, she was even more certain that Joseph did not write the text. She couldn't shake the chilling thought that someone else may have forged both the text and the note. If so, who? And more importantly, why? At the time, Joseph's phone hadn't been found, but IUPD detectives were working on tracking it, so all Vivian could do was patiently wait to hear what Detective Schmiel uncovered. Meanwhile, the Facebook post that Vivian had uploaded earlier that day was getting a lot of traction. By Tuesday afternoon, word had spread among Joseph's close friends that he'd gone missing. Joseph's friend Jess was one of the first to hear that her friend had disappeared. She vividly remembers how she found out.
On Monday morning, I think it was, Monday morning. I remember I was taking a midterm, or if it wasn't, it was like a big test in a hard class. And so I'd just been like studying for it, and I'm taking this test and my phone is like going off. And I'm like, what is going on? And so as soon as I like finish and pass in my test, I'm getting like a call again. So I like rush outside to answer it, and it was, and he was like, have you seen Joe? And I said, no. And he was like, oh, have you talked to him? And I said, no, I haven't. And then he was like, well, we can't find him. He's missing.
The name from the interview has been obscured because it's the true identity of one of Joseph's fraternity brothers, the roommate that we have been referring to as Josh. We cannot legally disclose his real name on this podcast. When the roommates told Jess about the strange note they had supposedly found on Joseph's bed, she became even more upset.
And he put this, like, he left this weird note in his room. I think he was on the bed or something. And then he told me like what the note said, and like immediately like my heart dropped, because I was like, I haven't talked to him like since, I guess it would be like considered Sunday morning because we were there late Saturday. I hadn't talked to him since then.
Like Vivian, Jess also thought that something was off about the note, but not for the same reasons Vivian did. Jess thought it was possible that Joseph wrote the note. She didn't have any reason to believe he wasn't the author. She thought the note sounded like Joseph might have been running from something or someone.
I just thought it was really weird. Like, to me, it was like, is he running from somebody? Like, that's what it sounded like to me, that he was like afraid and he needed to leave and leave quickly. I think that was my like first, it never crossed my mind that he didn't write the note. Like, I just thought like, okay, this is so weird. Like, wonder where he's like, who he's running from or what he's running from or something. Like, clearly to me, it felt like he didn't feel safe where he was and he needed to leave.
Jess told me something I've heard from a few of Joseph's friends, that maybe he had just left and gone to stay with his mom. Maybe he was running from something. Since the Virgin Islands are unincorporated territories of the United States, Joseph wouldn't have needed a passport to travel there. The idea that Joseph might have traveled to St. Croix was a rumor that circulated throughout his fraternity as word spread of his disappearance. Was it possible he left to stay with his mom without telling anyone? It wasn't a theory that Vivian or Joseph's family considered. They thought it was unlikely that Joseph would go to St. Croix without telling them, especially considering how his last trip there had ended. As news of Joseph's disappearance continued to spread, and more questions arose without any answers. The only thing that was clear was that he hadn't been seen or heard from in almost 2 full days. Jess couldn't help but think the worst.
So I was like, oh my God, like, I just, like my mind just like went to like the worst possible things, like, where is he? Like, and so immediately, like that week, like, well, I would say probably the next day after nobody had heard from him, like I was just like a mess, and I was just like driving around, like trying to like look for him in like any place that I could think of that like maybe he would be. Like I was like driving, I remember, till like 3 a.m. some nights, just like, where are you, Joe? Like calling him, like trying to do like whatever I could.
Joseph never answered Jess's calls. By Tuesday evening, September 29th, Joseph had been missing for a full 48 hours. Even though there were a lot of people looking for him, no one seemed to have any clues about his movements or whereabouts past Sunday night. After Vivian's visit to the Mitchell Street house, she decided to go to the official Sigma Pi fraternity house to talk with the rest of Joseph's fraternity brothers. I asked her if the Sigma Pi brothers were forthcoming.
No, not at all. They were very closed off, and in fact, other than the guy that I spoke to that was telling me all the guys that he was with, the majority of the guys, whenever I would go and try to say something to them, they'd just say, oh, well, you should just talk to They all would just keep circling back to like they had already kind of made this like pact that was going to be the mouthpiece for this whole situation, and they didn't know anything else.
The obscured name from this interview is Joseph's roommate, whom we've been referring to as Josh. Joseph's fraternity brothers kept referring her back to Josh, which worried Vivian, because she'd heard that Josh may not be a trustworthy source. Vivian sat down with more of Joseph's fraternity brothers at the Sig Pi house on Wednesday, September 30th, to continue trying to figure out what might have happened to her little brother. She recorded the conversation, but we cannot publish the original recording. The following is a recorded reenactment of the conversation from that day.
Just so confusing to meet you, but the more information we get is just more confusing again.
So, they said that Joseph was over at their house that night or on Sunday night.
Yeah, and just disappeared in the middle of the night. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems like from what we've been hearing, he was maybe hiding stuff from a lot of us, but yeah.
Yeah. And I'm still trying to figure out if that is relevant or if it's like, part of the whole situation. Because, it looks like it's been there for a long time, but it's just weird.
Joseph's fraternity brothers referenced that Joseph was hiding things from them. So what did they mean by that? According to Vivian, the brothers later mentioned that Joseph had some pill bottles in his room with scratched out labels. If the information about the pill bottles turned out to be something important, Vivian trusted IUPD detectives would let her know. This conversation with the Sig Pi brothers marked the beginning of the fraternity's stance that perhaps Joseph was involved with drugs, and that his involvement with them somehow led to his disappearance. But there was something the fraternity didn't know. Something Vivian was keeping to herself as she met with them. When Vivian was at the Mitchell Street house the day before, she was able to access Joseph's laptop computer. She later turned it over to IUPD, but not before checking her brother's Facebook account and a group chat he'd saved. The group chat was between the fraternity brothers and included messages sent and received after Joseph went missing.
I actually had access to Joseph's GroupMe page, and it had all of the fraternity brothers like chattering on there about like trying to cover themselves and saying like, oh, Joseph's not really a brother because he hasn't paid his dues yet, even though it's the beginning of the semester.
Even though Vivian had read the group chat before she'd spoken with the fraternity brothers, she kept that to herself. She wanted to see what they'd say about her brother. Some of the messages between the brothers indicated that Joseph had failed to pay his fall semester dues. So a few of the brothers on the chat made a point to mention that this technically meant their missing friend wasn't a true Sig Pi member. Despite what the brothers were saying, at the time of his disappearance, Joseph was an official Sig Pi brother. And keep in mind that the week of September 27th was still early in the fall semester, and it wasn't unusual for new members to have not fully paid their dues.
He's living with the brothers, so regardless if he didn't pay yet, which I'm sure there's hundreds of other guys in that same fraternity that are in the same situation, with it being like September, October, it's just, that doesn't mean that he's not a part of the fraternity all of a sudden. He's already pledged, he's already done everything to get in, and now they want to hurry up and distance themselves from him.
The group chat messages made Vivian wonder if the frat brothers had something to hide. It's not uncommon for college kids to drink, smoke pot, and experiment with drugs from time to time. But beyond occasionally smoking pot, Vivian never knew Joseph to take drugs or have any sort of involvement in illegal activities. Over those first few days, as Vivian tracked down Joseph's friends, she asked them whether or not they thought he could have been involved in something dangerous. Here's a recording of Vivian speaking with Jess at the time.
Does Joseph do any other type of drugs? I'm not trying to get him in trouble or anything, but I'm just really curious.
No, not that. I think he may have done Molly a few times, but
Okay.
with his frat. I was never there when he did that.
Recently.
No, not that I know of.
Joseph's friends that I've spoken with have said the same, that Joseph smoked pot and that it was something he and his roommates did together fairly often. It wasn't a secret. At this point, things were just not adding up for Vivian. She was left with more questions than answers. How could her brother have just vanished without a working car? Had someone given him a ride somewhere? Vivian wasn't getting any clear answers, at least not from Joseph's Sig Pi brothers or friends. Before the end of the week, she checked in with Detective Schmiel again, and the department had a few updates. IUPD had determined that Joseph hadn't withdrawn or deposited any money in his bank account since Sunday. The police had also been able to pull surveillance camera footage from around town and had determined the locations of some of the last pings from Joseph's cell phone.
They checked the bus stations, they checked all that stuff, and then his phone, was pinging in Bloomington. It wasn't outside of the United States.
On the next episode of A Heavy Weight, Joseph's cell phone pings reveal where he might have gone the night he vanished. But those clues only lead to more questions, not just about where he went, but what he could have been up to.
I think it was near the beginning of this summer. Joe had mentioned to my roommate that he wanted to make DMT. Because I'd never heard of it before, but I guess it's I think it's like a hallucinogen or something.
It just was more confusing than anything. It was just weird because just the locations didn't really add up.
A Heavy Weight is written, produced, and hosted by me, Stacy Brodowski. Edited and engineered by Joseph Caldwell. Additional editing, music, and sound design by Mike Brodowski.